Alexander Thorne stood at the panoramic window of his 40th floor office in the prestigious Apex Tower in Hudson Yards, observing the vibrant pulse of New York City. At 29, he was the picture of success: an impeccably tailored graphite Armani suit, a shirt of the finest Egyptian cotton, and a Patek Philippe watch that cost more than the average American made in 5 years. But it wasn't the clothes that commanded attention. It was the sharp, confident gaze of a man who knew his worth. Alexander, or Alex to his friends, was the face of American tech success. The creator of a financial app he had sold 2 years ago to a Silicon Valley giant for a sum that made him one of the youngest self-made millionaires on the East Coast. A New York October was painting the city in shades of gold and bronze. From his perch, Alex could see the Hudson River flowing lazily, reflecting the afternoon sun. He used to love this time of year. Strolls with Maddie through Central Park, the smell of roasted nuts from a street cart in the West Village, planning for Thanksgiving and Christmas. Now, autumn only brought a tide of painful memories. Behind the glass doors of his office, investors from London and Berlin were waiting, but Alexander had asked his assistant for 10 minutes. Today was the 2-year anniversary of the day that had shattered his life, the accident that killed his 7-month-old daughter, Julia. 2 years since the end of his relationship with Madison Hayes, who couldn't bear his emotional withdrawal and obsessive plunge into work after the tragedy. "Mr. Thorne, the investors are getting impatient." The voice of Jessica, his assistant, crackled through the intercom, pulling him from his thoughts. "I'm on my way," he replied, straightening his tie in the reflection. A professional smile settled on his face, a mask he had perfected to hide his pain. "Please have the documents ready and ask Thomas to join us in 15 minutes with the financial analysis." The meeting stretched late into the evening. Talks with investors, a business dinner, and then a video conference with partners from Silicon Valley. It all meant that Alexander didn't return to his sprawling penthouse in a chic Tribeca high-rise until after midnight. The 3,000-square-foot space, with its sweeping views of the Manhattan skyline, had been decorated by a top interior designer, minimalist, but with the most expensive materials. Yet, for all its luxury, the apartment felt like a hotel suite, perfectly appointed but devoid of soul and personal touches. Alex tossed his jacket onto a designer armchair and went to the bar, pouring himself a glass of 17-year-old Hibiki whiskey. It wasn't his first drink of the day, but he needed something to help him sleep. Ever since he lost Julia, sleep was a fugitive, and when it came, it brought nightmares, visions of the accident he hadn't seen but that his mind replayed 100 times in excruciating detail. The next morning, a text from his mother woke him. "Darling, I'll be over for lunch. We need to discuss your attendance at the Metropolitan Foundation's charity gala. And no, you can't refuse. I've already promised Hannah Rothschild you'd be there to bid on her daughter's painting." Alexander sighed heavily. His mother, Barbara Thorne, was a prominent figure in New York's social and philanthropic circles. Since his father's death 5 years ago, which had left her with a considerable fortune and a chain of boutique hotels, she had dedicated herself to charitable events. And ever since Alex became the tech wunderkind of Manhattan, as the media had dubbed him, his mother constantly involved him in her initiatives. He also knew this was another matchmaking attempt. Hannah Rothschild had a daughter his age, a talented painter who had recently returned from Paris. After an intense workout in the building's private gym and a quick shower, Alexander sat down at his laptop to review the morning reports. His new venture capital firm, specializing in tech startups, was growing rapidly. He was analyzing a potential investment in an Austin-based AI startup when he heard the sound of the front door opening. "Good morning. We're from Pristine Clean," an older woman's voice announced. "Christina is sick, so we're the replacement crew today." Alexander nodded without looking up from his screen. He paid little attention to the people who cleaned his apartment. The service came twice a week, and he was usually already at the office or in meetings. Today, however, he had decided to work from home before lunch with his mother. For the next few hours, Alex was completely absorbed in his work. He analyzed financial data, held several conference calls, and prepared a presentation for potential investors. When he finished, it was already afternoon. He realized he hadn't eaten since morning, so he decided to make some coffee and a light snack before his mother arrived. Leaving his home office, he heard a quiet humming coming from the kitchen. The melody was strangely familiar. It was the lullaby Maddie used to sing to little Julia. Intrigued, he walked closer and stopped in the doorway, unable to believe his eyes. Standing at the sink was a slender woman in the cleaning company's uniform. Her blonde hair, now tied back in a simple ponytail, shone in the sunlight streaming through the kitchen window. Even from behind, she was unmistakable. It was Maddie, his former partner, Julia's mother. "Maddie!" His voice caught in his throat. The woman froze, then slowly turned around. Her face, once always smiling and full of life, now seemed paler and thinner than he remembered. He noticed shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, but they were still the same blue eyes he had once fallen in love with. "Alex," she whispered, clearly startled and flustered. "I'm not supposed to be here. I'm covering for a co-worker. I didn't know this was your apartment." Alexander felt his heart race. 1,000 questions swirled in his mind. What had happened? Why was Maddie, who had been a promising architect at one of New York's top firms, now working as a cleaner? He had last seen her at Julia's funeral, broken, blaming him for not being with them that fateful day, for being too busy with his company, his career. Then she had vanished from his life, changing her phone number, moving out of their shared apartment. He had tried to find her, but he quickly drowned himself in work, which became his only escape from the pain. "Maybe we could get some coffee," he offered, not knowing what else to say. Maddie hesitated, nervously wringing the dishcloth in her hands. "I shouldn't. I have to finish cleaning and pick up Sophie from preschool," she answered quietly. "Sophie?" he asked, a strange knot forming in his stomach. Maddie looked him straight in the eye, then slowly reached into the pocket of her uniform and pulled out her phone. With trembling hands, she unlocked the screen and showed him a picture of a little girl. She was maybe 2 years old, with golden curls and big blue eyes, the same eyes Alexander saw every night in his dreams. "She's my daughter," Maddie said, her voice sounding like it was about to break. "She's 2 years and 3 months old." Alexander felt his legs go weak. The little girl in the photo bore a striking resemblance to Julia. The same eyes, the same smile, even the characteristic dimple in her left cheek that she'd inherited from him. It was impossible, and yet he did the quick math in his head. 2 years and 3 months. That meant Maddie must have been pregnant when the accident happened, when Julia died. But could she have kept it from him? Could she have hidden the existence of a second child? "Who's the father?" he asked, though he feared the answer. Maddie put her phone away and looked away, staring at the New York skyline through the window. "It's complicated, Alex. Very complicated," she answered softly. At that exact moment, the front door opened, and an elegant woman in her 50s entered, dressed in a cream-colored Chanel suit, her dark hair perfectly coiffed with a few streaks of silver. "Alexander, I'm early, but I thought we could—" Barbara Thorne stopped mid-sentence, her eyes falling on Maddie, her usually composed and polite face twisted into a mask of shock and disdain. "What is she doing here?" Alexander looked at his mother, then at Maddie, feeling the world around him begin to spin. The atmosphere in the room grew so thick you could cut it with a knife. He knew his mother had never cared for Maddie. She believed that the ambitious but modestly raised architect wasn't a suitable partner for her son, the heir to the Thorne fortune. She'd never said it outright, but she'd made it felt in 1,000 subtle ways. "Mom, this is an unexpected reunion," he said calmly, though he felt the tension rising inside him. "Maddie is covering for our regular cleaning person today." Barbara sized the young woman up with a cold glance from head to toe. "I see," she said in a tone that suggested she understood nothing at all. Well then, we won't keep you from your work. Alexander, we have a few things to discuss before the gala. Maddie quickly put down the cloth and began to gather her things. I'm actually just about finished, she said, avoiding Barbara's gaze. Sorry for the disturbance. As Maddie headed for the door, Alexander impulsively grabbed her arm. Wait, he said quietly, ignoring his mother's disapproving glare. We need to talk about Sophie, please. Maddie hesitated, a mix of fear and determination in her eyes. There's nothing to talk about, Alex. She's my daughter, my life. It's been 2 years. Is she? He couldn't finish the question, but his eyes said everything. Maddie looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing every word. We'll talk, but not now, she whispered finally. Call the cleaning company. I'll leave my number with them for you. Then she quickly slipped out of the apartment, leaving Alexander with his mother and 1,000 unanswered questions. Barbara immediately approached her son, placing a hand on his arm. Alexander, I don't know what just happened here, but I hope you're not planning on getting involved with that woman again, she said firmly. After everything you've been through. Alex gently shook off her hand and walked to the window, watching as Maddie got into an old white Honda Civic in the parking lot below. Mom, she has a daughter, he said quietly. A little girl who looks exactly like Julia and who is 2 years and 3 months old. Barbara turned pale, leaning against the kitchen counter for support. That's impossible, she whispered. She wouldn't do something like that. But Alexander was no longer listening. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place in his mind. Maddie's sudden disappearance after the accident, her refusal to have any contact, even how much she had changed. If Sophie was his daughter, if for 2 years Maddie had hidden the existence of their child from him. But why? What could have happened that would make her take such a desperate step? He knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't rest until he learned the truth. And that truth was about to change his life forever. The next 48 hours were the longest of Alexander's life. After seeing Maddie, he couldn't focus on anything else. The charity gala, which he attended only for his mother's sake, dragged on endlessly. Smiles, small talk, an auction where he mechanically bid on a young painter's work for a sum that caused a stir among the guests. He couldn't even remember what the painting looked like or what the artist's name was. You're so distracted, Barbara commented as they rode home in the limo. You bid $250,000 on that painting, and you didn't even go over to say hello to Suzanne. To who? He asked, staring at the flashing lights of New York outside the window. Suzanne Rothschild, the artist, Hannah's daughter. Barbara sighed with irritation. Alexander, you were supposed to talk to her. She's a great match, studied in Paris. Her father is— Mom, give it a rest, he interrupted, sharper than he intended. I'm not interested in being set up. I have more important things on my mind right now. Barbara looked at him intently, her expression softening. It's because of her, isn't it? Because of Maddie and that daughter of hers. Alexander didn't answer, but his silence was answer enough. For the rest of the ride, neither of them said a word. The next day, Alex called the cleaning company under the pretext of filing a complaint. The voice on the phone was professional and businesslike, but when he asked about Madison Hayes, there was a pause on the other end. I'm very sorry, Mr. Thorne, but Ms. Hayes resigned last night. She is no longer our employee, the manager finally replied. Alexander felt a wave of panic wash over him. Maddie was disappearing from his life again, this time potentially taking with her not just memories, but a second child whose existence he never knew about. It's extremely important that I get in touch with her, he pressed. It's about some personal items she found in my apartment, things of great sentimental value. After a long moment of hesitation, the woman sighed. I can't give you her contact information. It's against company policy. But I can pass along your message if she comes in for her final paycheck. It was a slim hope, but Alexander clung to it. He left his phone number and a short message. We need to talk. Please don't disappear again. Alex? 3 days later, when he had almost given up hope, his phone rang. An unknown number. His heart leaped into his throat when he heard her voice. "Alex, it's Maddie. I got your message." Maddie. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Thank you for calling. We have to meet. Please." The silence on the other end lasted so long, he thought she had hung up. "All right," she said finally, "but on my terms, in a public place." They agreed to meet the next day in a small cafe in Brooklyn Heights, far from the city center and the places Alexander frequented. He arrived 20 minutes early, ordered a coffee and waited, nervously turning the cup in his hands. Maddie appeared on time, dressed in a simple beige jacket and jeans, so different from the elegant outfits she used to wear. She sat across from him, placing her worn phone on the table. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," Alexander began. "Don't get your hopes up, Alex," she cut him off, looking him straight in the eye. "I only came because you deserve an explanation, but it won't change anything." Alexander felt his throat tighten. There was a finality in her voice, something that told him whatever had happened between them couldn't be fixed. "Sophie is my daughter, isn't she?" he asked directly, seeing no point in beating around the bush. Maddie looked down, her fingers drumming nervously on the tabletop. "Yes," she answered quietly. "She's your daughter." Even though he had expected this answer, the confirmation hit him like a physical blow. He had another daughter, a child who was alive, breathing, growing for the past 2 years, completely unaware of his existence. "Why?" was all he could manage to say. "Why didn't you tell me?" Maddie took a deep breath, as if gathering her strength for the answer. "I found out I was pregnant a week before the accident," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I was going to tell you that weekend. I even planned a special dinner, but you cancelled as usual. An important meeting, deadlines, new investors. As always, you were too busy for your family." Alexander wanted to protest, but he knew she was right. During that period, he had completely devoted himself to work, building the company that was supposed to provide them with financial stability. The irony was crushing. He had gained a fortune, but lost what was most precious. Then the accident happened, Maddie continued, her eyes filling with tears. "I was in shock, in mourning. My therapist said it was a miracle I didn't miscarry after such trauma. And you completely shut down. Even at Julia's funeral, you were absent, like your mind was somewhere else. You threw yourself into work even more than before." "It was my way of coping with the pain," Alexander defended himself weakly, "and I needed a partner." She raised her voice, drawing the attention of a few other patrons. She quickly composed herself. "I needed someone to be with me, to help me get through the hardest time of my life. But you weren't there. You were never there." Alexander felt his stomach clench into a tight knot. Was he really that selfish, so blinded by his own pain that he couldn't see her suffering? "When I found out Julia was gone, and I was carrying our second child," Maddie trailed off, searching for the right words. "I realized I didn't want this child to grow up the way we had been living, with a father who always put work before family, who was physically present but emotionally unavailable." "That's not fair," he protested. I am a good father." "You were a good provider," Maddie corrected him. "You gave us luxury, but not time, not attention, not love. How many times did you spend more than an hour a day with Julia? How many times did you change her diaper, feed her, bathe her?" Alexander wanted to answer, but he realized he couldn't. The truth was, most of the responsibilities of caring for Julia had fallen on Maddie, even though she also worked a full-time job. He always had an excuse, an important meeting, a deadline, a client he couldn't let down. "And then there was another reason," Maddie added more quietly, not looking him in the eye. "Your mother." "My mother?" he repeated, surprised. "What does she have to do with this?" Maddie sighed, as if she didn't want to revisit those memories. "After the funeral, when you were at one of your endless meetings, she came to me with a proposition," she explained, her voice turning cold. "She said I was young, that I could start a new life. She offered me money, a lot of money, if I moved out of New York and never bothered you again." According to her, you were too devastated by Julia's death to handle a new baby. Alexander felt the blood drain from his face. His own mother had tried to bribe Maddie to disappear from his life. It was unbelievable, and yet it sounded just like Barbara, who always tried to control every aspect of his life. "You didn't take the money," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Of course not," Maddie replied with indignation. "But that was the turning point. I realized I didn't want my child to grow up in a family like that, with a grandmother who treats people like pawns on a chessboard and a father who lets her get away with everything." Suddenly, many pieces of the puzzle started to fit. Maddie's sudden disappearance, her refusal of contact, the lack of any financial claims despite her difficult situation. "Why are you working as a cleaner?" he asked. "You were a brilliant architect. Your project won an award. Try finding a job as an architect when you're 8 months pregnant." She cut him off bitterly. "And then with a newborn, with no family support, no partner. I work as a cleaner because the hours are flexible. I can take Sophie to preschool and pick her up. Besides," she hesitated, "I lost my passion for architecture too, after everything that happened." Alexander felt a pang of guilt. This was all his fault. If he had been a better partner, a better father, if he hadn't let work take over his life. "I want to meet Sophie," he said suddenly, surprising even himself. "She's my daughter. I have the right." "You have no rights," Maddie interrupted him sharply. "Legally, you don't exist in her life. You're not on the birth certificate." "I can change that," he declared firmly. "I can get a DNA test. Go to court. And do what?" Panic laced her voice now. "Take her from me. Use your money and influence to take my daughter away. That's what I've been afraid of this whole time." "No," he protested vehemently. "I would never do that. I want to be a part of her life. I want to know her, to watch her grow up. I can't lose another daughter, Maddie. I wouldn't survive it." Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't try to hide them. Something in his raw pain must have moved Maddie, because her expression softened. "Are you not the same man you were 2 years ago?" she asked quietly. "I don't know," he answered honestly, "but I know that losing Julia changed me forever. And I know that I will do anything, absolutely anything, not to make the same mistakes with Sophie." Maddie was silent for a long moment, as if engaged in an internal battle. Finally, she reached for her phone and started searching for something. Then she slid the device toward him. On the screen was a video of a little girl running joyfully across a playground, then walking up to the camera, proudly showing off a little plastic airplane. "It's my new one, Mommy, from Aunt Anna," the girl said in a clear, bright voice, her blue eyes, identical to Alex's, shining with joy. Alexander felt his heart shatter into 1,000 pieces, only to reassemble itself differently, fuller than before. This was his child, his blood, a miracle whose existence he never knew. "She's beautiful," he whispered, unable to tear his eyes from the screen. "Yes," Maddie agreed with a gentle smile. "She's wonderful, smart, stubborn, and curious about the world. Sometimes I see Julia in her, the way she tilts her head when she's thinking, the same laugh. And my eyes," Alexander added. "And your eyes," Maddie confirmed. For a moment, they sat in silence, lost in memories and thoughts of a future that suddenly seemed uncertain and terrifying, but also full of new possibilities. "What now?" Alex finally asked. Maddie took her phone and put it back in her pocket. Her face was serious again. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I know I won't let Sophie get dragged into your complicated family, your business empire, and all the drama that comes with it. She needs stability, a normal childhood. I can provide that," he offered immediately. "I can buy you an apartment, pay for the best preschool, hire—" "See?" She cut him off with frustration. "You're doing it again. You think money solves every problem. That's not what this is about, Alex." Alexander fell silent, realizing he was making the same mistake again, trying to buy a solution instead of truly understanding what his family needed. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. You're right. This is new to me. I'm trying to learn. Maddie looked at him searchingly, as if trying to find the answer to an unspoken question in his face. Finally, she sighed and reached into her bag, pulling out a small business card. We're going to this park on Saturday, she said, sliding the card into his hand. We'll be there around 10 in the morning. If you want, you can come and meet her. But on my terms, I'll introduce you as an old friend, nothing more until I'm sure you've really changed. Alexander nodded, feeling both grateful and terrified. This was his chance, perhaps his only chance, to become a part of his daughter's life. He couldn't waste it. I'll be there, he promised, clutching the card like his most prized possession. And Maddie, thank you. As they left the cafe, Alexander noticed it had started to rain. Without hesitation, he took off his expensive jacket and held it over Maddie's head as they ran to her car. It was a small gesture, but something about it reminded them both of how things used to be between them, before career, money, and tragedy destroyed everything. See you on Saturday, Maddie said, getting into her old Honda. See you, he replied, standing in the rain and watching her drive away. He didn't care that his $1,000 shirt was getting soaked. He didn't care that passers-by were recognizing him and discreetly taking pictures with their phones. At that moment, he could only think of one thing, that in 3 days he would meet his daughter, and that this time he would do everything to be the father she deserved. He didn't know, however, that someone had been watching his meeting with Maddie, someone who had no intention of letting this new family idyll threaten plans that had been carefully laid for years. Saturday morning dawned over New York, bright but cool, a quintessential autumn day. The leaves in the parks had turned every shade of gold and red, and a light mist drifted over the Hudson. Alexander hadn't slept all night. For the first time in years, he felt completely unprepared for an upcoming event. His years of experience in business negotiations were useless. His wealth and influence meant nothing. Today he was going to meet his daughter, and all the money in the world couldn't guarantee he'd make a good first impression. In his closet full of designer suits and bespoke shirts, he couldn't find anything suitable. He finally settled on the simplest pair of jeans he owned, comfortable shoes, and a navy sweater. He looked normal, like a regular dad heading to the park, not a millionaire from the covers of business magazines. Before leaving, he stopped at a room whose door he rarely opened. Julia's room. Everything was just as it had been 2 years ago, the pastel walls, the white crib, the plush toys. He stood in the doorway for a moment, remembering his first daughter, whose smile he would never forget. Then he gently closed the door and left. "Heading out, Mr. Thorne?" asked Stan, the doorman of the luxury apartment complex, as Alexander walked through the lobby. "Yes, I have. An important meeting," he replied, heading for the garage. "Shall I call your driver?" Stan seemed surprised to see Alexander walking toward his private parking space, where a silver Porsche Taycan sat. "I'd rather drive myself today," Alex smiled, getting into the car. It was only halfway there that he realized a luxury electric sports car worth over $250,000 wasn't the best choice for a meeting meant to prove to Maddie that he was a changed man. Too late to turn back, he only stopped at a small florist to buy a simple bouquet of wildflowers. The park Maddie had indicated was on the edge of Brooklyn, in a quiet neighborhood full of young families. Alexander parked the Porsche a few blocks away, not wanting to draw attention. By the time he arrived, his heart was beating so hard he momentarily feared he was having a heart attack. He looked around the park. It was well maintained, with colorful swings, slides, and a sandbox. A few children were already playing, despite the early hour, and then he saw her, Maddie, sitting on a bench near the playground. Standing next to her was a little girl in a red coat and a hat with a pom-pom, holding a paper airplane in her hand. Sophie. Alexander stopped for a moment, wanting to commit this image to memory forever. His daughter was here, just a few dozen yards away, alive, real, not a picture on a phone, not a video, but a real child of flesh and blood. His child. He slowly walked toward them. Maddie noticed him first, her expression a mixture of relief and anxiety. She probably hadn't been sure until the last minute if he would come. "Hi," he said quietly, approaching the bench. "Hi," Maddie replied, then turned to the little girl. "Sophie, this is my friend, Mr. Alexander." The little girl looked up at him with her big blue eyes. His eyes, and Alexander felt something in his heart melt. She was even more beautiful than in the pictures. She had Maddie's bright curly hair, but his eyes and chin, and dimples in her cheeks, just like Julia. "Hi, Sophie," he said, kneeling to be at her level. "It's nice to meet you." "I have an airplane," the girl announced, showing him the paper plane. "It flies by itself." "I see," he replied with a smile. "That's a very nice airplane. Did you make it yourself?" "No, Uncle Tom did," she answered seriously, "but I colored it. Red. It's my favorite." "Red is a wonderful color," Alexander agreed, then remembered the flowers. "I brought something for your mom." He handed the bouquet to Maddie, who accepted it with surprise. "Thank you," she said, a little flustered. "That's very sweet of you." "And I have something for you, Sophie," Alexander added, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small, plush teddy bear keychain. "I thought you might like this." Sophie took the keychain and examined it with childlike fascination. "Thank you," she said, and then, unexpectedly added, "Do you like swings?" "I love swings," Alexander replied seriously. "Then come on." Sophie grabbed his hand with a natural trust that made his heart ache. "I'll show you the best swing." Alexander looked questioningly at Maddie, who nodded with a slight smile. She let Sophie lead him to the playground, while she remained on the bench, watching them from a distance. The next 2 hours were the happiest of Alexander's life in a very long time. He pushed Sophie on the swing, caught her at the bottom of the slide, helped her climb a small rock wall. He listened to her stories about preschool, about the neighbor's cat, and about how much she loved to eat pancakes with strawberry jam. He absorbed every word, every gesture, every laugh from the little girl, afraid that it could all end at any moment. At one point, they sat on the edge of the sandbox, and Sophie showed him how she was building a castle. "My mommy says I'm a princess," she said, carefully placing a bucket of sand. "But I don't have a daddy. Ms. Barbara from preschool says some princesses don't have daddies." Alexander glanced at Maddie, who had come closer upon hearing the conversation. Their eyes met for a moment, full of unspoken words and emotions. "You know, Sophie," he said carefully, "every princess has a daddy, even if sometimes he can't be with her." "Why can't he?" the girl asked, looking at him with childlike curiosity. Alexander felt his throat tighten. What could he say? How could he explain such a complicated situation to a 2-year-old? "Sometimes grown-ups have problems they have to solve," Maddie interjected, sitting down next to them, "and it takes a lot of time." "Like when my bike broke?" Sophie asked, "and you had to fix it." "A little like that," Maddie smiled, stroking her daughter's hair, "except grown-up problems are a lot more complicated than a broken bike." Sophie seemed satisfied with this answer and returned to building her castle. Alexander looked at Maddie with gratitude. "She's amazing," he whispered. "Thank you for letting me meet her." Maddie nodded, a shadow of sadness in her eyes. "She was always like you," she said quietly, "not just in looks. She has your stubbornness and your curiosity about the world. And your artistic talent," he added, watching how precisely Sophie arranged pebbles around her sandcastle, "and your good heart." They sat like that for a while, watching their daughter, connected by an invisible thread of shared love for this little human who came from their union. "What's next?" Alexander finally asked. "Will you let me see her regularly?" Maddie sighed, clearly still weighing all the pros and cons. "Sophie needs stability," she said finally. "I can't let you pop into her life and then disappear as soon as a more important business project or a new girlfriend comes along. I would never do that," he protested fervently. "You say that now," she replied calmly. "But you don't know what will happen in a month, in a year. Your life, your world, it's all so different from ours." He looked at Sophie, who was now decorating her castle with colorful leaves. "Listen," she continued. "You can see her, but on my terms, slowly, no sudden changes. No introducing her to your millionaire life, your business contacts, your family, especially your mother." Alexander felt a pang of guilt at the thought of Barbara. He hadn't told her about today's meeting. He wasn't ready for that confrontation yet, for explaining the decisions he had made. "I agree to everything," he said honestly, "but I want to formally acknowledge Sophie as my daughter. I want her to have my last name. I want to have parental rights." Maddie stiffened. "That's too much, too soon," she protested. "You've only just met her." "But she's my daughter," he insisted. "I want her to have everything she deserves. Health insurance, the best education, financial security." "You always bring everything back to money," she interrupted with frustration. "Sophie has everything she needs. We may not live in a luxury penthouse or drive an expensive car, but she's not wanting for anything." Alexander looked at her worn hands, the result of her work as a cleaner, and at the faded jacket that had seen better days. He knew that Maddie was surely giving up many things to provide Sophie with all the necessities. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to suggest you're not giving her the best. I want to help. I want to be part of her life. I want to make up for lost time." Maddie looked at him for a long time, as if judging his sincerity. Finally she sighed. "All right," she said. "You can see Sophie regularly, once a week to start, always with me present. If it works out, if you prove you can be relied on, then we'll talk about the next steps." "Thank you," Alexander said, feeling immense relief. "You won't regret this decision, I promise." Maddie smiled sadly. "You've promised me a lot of things before, Alex." Before he could reply, their conversation was interrupted by Sophie's cheerful voice. "Look, a castle for the princess," she called out, pointing to her sand creation. "It's beautiful," Alexander praised, delighted by her work. "You're very talented, Sophie." "Just like Mommy," the girl replied with pride. "Mommy draws the prettiest houses in the world." Alexander looked questioningly at Maddie. "You still draw?" "Sometimes," she admitted reluctantly. "In the evenings, after Sophie is asleep. It's just a hobby." "You always had a huge talent," he said sincerely. "I remember your thesis project. All the professors were impressed." Maddie shrugged, but Alexander noticed a slight blush on her cheeks. She used to love it when he praised her work. "Sophie, we have to go soon," she said, changing the subject. "We still have grocery shopping to do." "5 more minutes," the little girl pleaded. "I have to finish the castle." "Okay, 5 minutes," Maddie agreed, then turned to Alexander. "Maybe you could help us with the shopping. Sophie always gets fussy at the store, and it would be easier with 2 of us." Alexander couldn't believe his luck. Extra time with his daughter, and with Maddie. It was more than he had dared to dream. "I'd love to," he replied, trying not to show how excited he was. An hour later, the 3 of them were navigating the aisles of a large supermarket. Sophie sat in the shopping cart, which Alexander pushed, while Maddie selected items. To an outside observer, they looked like a typical young family out for groceries. "I want juice," Sophie announced as they passed the beverage aisle. "We'll get juice, sweetie," Maddie replied, "but first, vegetables." "I don't like vegetables," the girl wrinkled her nose. "But vegetables make us strong and healthy," Alexander interjected. "You know who eats a lot of vegetables? Superheroes." "Really?" Sophie looked at him with disbelief. "Absolutely," he confirmed seriously. "That's why they have such superpowers, especially broccoli. Broccoli is every superhero's secret weapon." Maddie rolled her eyes but smiled when Sophie suddenly started asking for broccoli. Alexander shot her a triumphant look, and she whispered, "Monster," but without anger, more with a hint of amusement. When they got to the checkout, Alexander instinctively pulled out his platinum credit card, but Maddie placed a hand on his arm. "No," she said quietly but firmly. "I'll pay for this." "But," he started to protest. "Alex, if you want to be a part of our lives, you have to respect my rules," she interrupted. "We don't need your financial help. That's not what this is about." Alexander reluctantly put his card away, feeling strangely helpless. All his life, he had solved problems with money. Now he had to learn a different approach. When they left the store, Sophie was already dozing lightly in Maddie's arms. The day, full of excitement, had tired her out. "I'll drive you," Alexander offered. Maddie hesitated. "Where's your car?" "A few blocks from here," he replied, suddenly realizing his Porsche might not be the best mode of transport for a small child. "But we can take a taxi if you prefer." "We have our car," Maddie replied, pointing to the old white Honda in the parking lot. "Sophie has her car seat and everything she needs." "Of course," he agreed quickly. "I'll walk you to your car then." When they reached the Honda, Maddie carefully placed a sleepy Sophie in her car seat. The little girl opened her eyes and saw Alexander. "Will you come tomorrow?" she asked sleepily. Alexander looked at Maddie, who gave a slight nod. "I'll see you again soon, I promise," he said, a warmth spreading through his chest. "Maybe next weekend?" "Saturday, same place," Maddie confirmed, getting behind the wheel. "Around 10. "I'll be there," he promised, then leaned into the window to say goodbye to Sophie. "Bye-bye, princess. I loved your castle." "Bye-bye," Sophie replied, waving her little hand. He stood in the parking lot, watching Maddie's Honda disappear around a corner. He felt transformed, as if a light had suddenly appeared in his life after years of darkness. He had a daughter. He had a second chance to be a father. As he walked back to his Porsche, he noticed a sleek black Mercedes parked a few spaces away. Behind the wheel sat a man in dark sunglasses who seemed to be watching him. When their eyes met, the Mercedes sped off with a squeal of tires. Alexander frowned. Something about the car seemed strangely familiar, but he couldn't place it. He shrugged and got into his own car. Nothing could spoil his mood today, not after spending the most wonderful day he'd had in 2 years. He didn't know, however, that someone was just making a phone call that would change the course of events and threaten his newfound happiness. "Mrs. Thorne, it's Charles. You were right. Your son met with the woman and her daughter. I have photos. I'm sending them now."